Hello and welcome to Impera Project, a project built on a dream. Today we finished reading Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. Initially we wanted to make a video in which we tell you why you should read it, but the sheer complexity of the topics that have been discussed in this marvel of a book made us rethink our decision. It is clear that the content of the book is really interesting and a good chance for a good debate. So welcome to the second installment of the series Philosophy class. Today we are going to discuss the concept of capitalist realism and make our case against the way our society is moving towards. If you haven't seen our previous video from this series, we will explain briefly what philosophy class is all about. This series is dedicated to people who want to know even more than what we can discover in our normal videos. It takes longer to make these videos, but we are going deeper into the subjects that are actual and acute most of the time. For example, last time this class was in session, we talked about the current crisis of faith that happens in Western society. Like we said, these videos take more time and require more research to make. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe to our channel. Our last video, also inspired by this book, was extremely successful for our standards. This is the kind of engagement we are aiming for with every single one of our videos. So once again, if you consider our content worthwhile and you want to see more, we welcome you into our community. Thank you very much. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Class in session. We will start by talking about Mark Fisher. Who was him? Mark Fisher, also known for his blogging alias K-Punk, was an English writer, music critic, political and cultural theorist and philosopher. He made a name for himself in the early 2000s and was known for his writing on radical politics, music and pop culture. His book, Capitalist Realism, came as an unexpected surprise. His wife Zoe notes in the foreword of the book that Mark was extremely excited about completing his work, but wasn't that optimistic about the success it would later have. I would be really pleased if it sold 500 copies, he told me one day when we were out walking in Woodbridge. At the same time, he was struggling to land a job as a lecturer and trying to find a definitive appointment as an academic. But after the success of the book, things started to improve. He never wanted to turn down an invitation to speak somewhere or an offer to write, as these things never felt like work to him, his wife notes. During the explosion that was the internet, a certain K-Punk blog started to gain attention, Alex Niven says in the introduction. As well as acting as a hub for the wider scene's primitive version of social media, K-Punk was also the space where Mark developed a philosophically expansive body of work. So the story of Mark Fisher is indeed interesting, as he was one of the modern philosophers that have made their debut not in a newspaper or in who knows what publishing house nobody heard about. He was one of the writers who started their career online. Having his own blog where he could express himself freely, Mark's work wasn't suffocated by the whims of the traditional media. He expected 500 copies sold, yet the book sold over 100,000 copies in its English version alone. We have to take into account that this book was written during one of the most important periods, the early 2000s, when the foundation for the economical and social drama and environment we live in today was laid. Alex Niven continues. As we have seen, capitalist realism was on one level a product of the specific environment of the noughties Britain, with hindsight from the vantage point of our own era of creeping authoritarianism and looming ecological catastrophe. Capitalist realism is not the book of socialism. It is a call for unity against oppression. It is a call for reason, for doubt when everything seems absolute. Calling Mark Fisher a socialist wouldn't be correct. Anti-capitalist seems more fitting. Away from the complex debates about deepening inequalities which occurred under third way liberalism, it is important to grasp that much of the sense of desperation Mark harnessed in capitalist realism arose from a historically distinct feeling that there was no visible opposition to a slowly worsening status quo. From his perspective as a British citizen, as a teacher in further education, and as someone trying to mount opposition, Mark Fisher brings to the table unique knowledge into the insides of a crumbling society that has taken a dark path, flirting with dystopian futures such as Children of Men or V for Vendetta. He refers constantly to important philosophers on both sides of the barricade, Zizek and Jameson, Deleuze and Guattari, and many others. Capitalist Realism is just as good a book in itself as it is an index of various references both from pop culture and from philosophy. This duality makes this work indeed a beautiful creation of our late capitalist society. Unfortunately, the story of Mark Fisher ends in tragedy. In 2017, he committed suicide after fighting off depression as much as he could. His success and the hope that this book brought to others couldn't help, in the end, his declining mental state. He will be forever remembered as a pioneer of the resistance against the current predicament we all find ourselves in. Capitalist Realism is a book that promotes unity. It is a dangerous situation of political mismanagement if one side of the political spectrum becomes too influential or too strong. Right now, as of the date of making this video, the right wing is predominant and is stronger than ever because it lacks an opponent. This book is a critique, an extremely on-point critique of our society, but it is also a rallying banner for the left to finally unite under. It is a book that holds the power to mount resistance. The concept of capitalist realism is used to define our current belief that was forcefully pushed on us that capitalism is the only way in which our world can properly function. It is our only solution, the only viable political and economic system, and what's even more outrageous than that, it is the belief that even thinking about any other way in which our society can function is an act of futility. We are all witnessing the destruction of public space, and the end of the world is not going to be a certain catastrophic event, a point zero in which humanity ceases to exist. Mark Fisher makes the case that the downfall of humanity has already begun, and it is going to be a slow and painful withering away, rather than an immediate cessation of living. As we become more and more lethargic, more passive, and we stop trying to change things, the corporations led by neoliberals are going to bleed the planet and the society until it finally succumbs. In the first chapter of Capitalist Realism, it is said that our current course of events resembles more the dystopian future of Children of Men more than the one from V for Vendetta. The chances that the world is going to turn to the authoritarianism in the same fashion in which it once did are extremely low, but we are experiencing a new mutation of the same cancer. A mutation in which the state becomes paralyzed, reduced only to its core military abilities, a state in which the public space is no longer existent, in which healthcare and education has been completely devoured by the greed of the few. Francis Fukuyama committed one of the most terrible sophisms in 1989 when he announced that we've reached the end of history. You probably don't really understand what's so wrong with this affirmation. We have to take into account the implications of this so-called end of history. If history has ended, then there is nothing new down the line. Everything that could have happened is all in the past. Taking this into consideration, Mark Fisher properly links this controversial statement with the situation depicted in Children of Men. Children of Men connects with the suspicion that the end has already come. The thought that it could well be the case that the future harbors only reiterations and repermutations. Could it be that there are no breaks, no shock of the new to come? The focus shifts from the next big thing to the last big thing. How long ago did it happen? And just how big it was? This can properly explain a cultural phenomenon that we've noticed for some time, the reintroduction of the past into the present. Think about it. How many times have you heard a song belonging to Frank Sinatra in modern media? Here's a list of where we found the good old Frank. How about the whole Casa de Papel, Bella Ciao thing going on? The fear of not having anything new, the existential dread in our subconscious that everything created today, even art, is a streamlined production with little to no quality, has made us seek refuge into the past. Capitalism consumes everything, and the history of humankind becomes the history of capitalism. Anything that is not relevant to the topic or does not encourage the hoarding of capital is no longer useful, is no longer necessary. Capitalism comes with its own system of equivalence, assigning a monetary value to anything. The power of capitalist realism derives in part from the way that capitalism subsumes and consumes all of previous history. One effect of its system of equivalence which can assign all cultural objects a monetary value. This was predicted and anticipated by Karl Marx all those years ago in a passage from the Communist Manifesto. Marx notes, "Capital has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of that numberless indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions. It has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation." The idea that art is as significant as it is justifiable from a monetary perspective has stabbed the artist in the back. Nowadays, art is no longer an expression of the soul, of one's experiences that he or she wants to share with the world. It is a product, which has to fit the painful demand and supply curse. The leaders of the European Union have a great tendency of being completely ignorant of the effect their actions have on the world. They have many times betrayed even their own citizens, pushing a depersonalizing rhetoric in which the citizen stops being himself and turns into simply an European who has to obey their nefarious whims. Mark Fisher tracks the beginning of the European neoliberal pandemic back to the 80s when Margaret Thatcher stated that there is no alternative. After crushing the miners' strike, imagine this happening when there was still an enemy to the neoliberal union. Capitalism, from its humble beginnings, was always forced to fight an external force, be it feudal lords or the communists. Today, it has no enemy whatsoever, so it started pushing its own fake enemies in an attempt to stabilize itself. If the capital hoarders can't colonize or indoctrinate, then capitalism itself cannot thrive. Art was one of the first opponents of this system that has been completely devoured. Like we said, today a painting is not an expression of the individual, it is a product. If there is no demand, then your supply of paintings doesn't mean anything. Mark Fisher uses as an example the tragic story of Nirvana and Kurt Cobain. We quote, "Cobain knew that he was just another piece of spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV. Knew that his every move was a cliché scripted in advance. Knew that even realizing it is a cliché." When Cobain committed suicide, rock music, this promised land of rebels and people who question status quo, was already eclipsed by hip-hop. Rapping in itself is a curious case of anti-capitalist culture that actually promotes embracing capitalism. The narrative presented by hip-hop, by rap, and nowadays by their trap counterpart is as capitalist-friendly as it goes. We plan on making a more in-depth video about this particular topic, but the cliché story of the man that ends up being self-made after starting from the ghettos by enduring the unfairness of the world, by working hard even against discrimination, is by no means hurting capitalism. Au contraire, is giving it legitimacy. The idea that everyone can make it if he endures enough is one of the most horrible fallacies, pieces of indoctrination that can ever be. This narrative of the self-made millionaire that started from a garage is not only a blatant lie, it is an evil manipulation technique. No millionaire at any point in history was ever self-made. Capitalism manages to incorporate its enemies. That's why you can go on the internet and buy t-shirts with Che Guevara's image on them. That's why you can go and watch Hollywood movies in which the enemy, the bad guy, turns out to be the evil corporation. We remember back in the days when James Bond was fighting the Soviet Union, Russian spies and traitors. That rhetoric so specific to the times of the Cold War is now replaced with anti-corporate rhetoric, curiously enough made by corporations. In Capitalist Realism, Mark Fisher talks about Wall-E. The film shows an Earth so despoiled that human beings are no longer capable of inhabiting it. We are left in no doubt that consumer capitalism and corporations, or rather one mega corporation by and large, is responsible for this depredation. It seems that the cinema audience is itself the object of this satire, which prompted some right-wing observers to recoil in disgust, condemning Disney Pixar for attacking its own audience. But this kind of irony feeds rather than challenges capitalist realism. Zizek makes a brilliant point in which he states that capitalism works because it makes us distance ourselves from our actions. As long as we know in our minds that what we do is bad, we can continue doing it because we have distanced ourselves. We know that our unhinged consumerism is destroying ourselves and the planet, but it's alright, we can buy electric cars so we can destroy it even better. We know that money is just a social construct, a form without consistency, but it's alright, we can continue sacrificing our own health to obtain it and spend it. As long as we have taken the ironic distance, Zizek says, we can continue fetishizing our consumerism. Capitalism makes any form of anti-capitalism irrelevant, because it is presented to us in a manner in which it forces us to admit that it is just as much a part of the problem as the problem itself. If a corporation destroys the world, it is alright, another corporation is going to repair it. If Ford or Renault or Volkswagen has destroyed our environment with their combustion engines, it is alright, Tesla will save us. In capitalism, the source of all our problems, the corporation, becomes salvation. You can keep eating your Big Mac. The fantasy being that Western consumerism, far from being intrinsically implicated in system global inequalities, could itself solve them. All we have to do is buy the right products. As Mark Fisher says here, the moral dilemma is no longer should we consume as much as we can, but actually it changes to we should consume as much as we can of the right product. It doesn't matter that plastic has been seen for tens of years as the best invention ever made, cheap, reliable, and extremely toxic for the planet. Now it is alright. Go consume all your hard-earned money on something plastic-free. It doesn't matter that cigarettes and smoking were always promoted as a cool thing to do. Now it's alright. Go and toast your lungs with vapes and heated tobacco. You might say, well, isn't that good? You have a problem and you are immediately offered the solution. No, it is not good at all, because we are sold the problem and immediately after we are sold the solution. It is just like making someone poor on purpose and then telling him that going to the casino is going to make him rich. Two wrongs don't make a right. In our previous video, we've touched on the subject of market Stalinism. If you want to see more about this concept, you can go check it out. We will discuss it briefly here as well. Market Stalinism is a perfect description of our current way of life. Corporations have sold us the illusion that there is a free market, while most of everything is owned by a couple of corporations. Antitrust laws have proven themselves inefficient. But market Stalinism is way more than that. It is an economical state of being in which the value on paper of an achievement is way more important than the achievement itself. It is a state of our society in which the PR is more important than the quality of a certain product. It is the moral successor of the Stalinistic repression and centralized bureaucracy of control and espionage. During his work as a teacher, Mark Fisher noticed that students face a difficult dilemma which has forever shaped further education. Is the student the beneficiary of the system or the product? Do we sell them education or we create education through them? This question has been answered by capitalist systems in the worst imaginable way, by transforming universities into businesses. Teachers have to report everything, the success rates, the abandon rates, only because based upon these reports the universities receive funding. The further education system is itself in a situation in which it cannot refuse anyone, even if it wanted to, because its own survival depends on it. That's why you see so many profiles in universities that don't contribute in any fashion to society. That's why there is so big of an abandonment rate in universities. For example, where we've gone to college, we started being around 80 people in our profile. After the first year, we lost almost half of our peers. At the end of the third year, we were only 37 remaining, many more giving up at the beginning of the fourth year. Many of us have never worked in the domain we've studied for years. Facing off this audacious situation, many students have fallen prey to what Mark Fisher names depressive hedonia. This situation has led students to mindlessly pursue the exact same consumerism and education as business attitude that has ruined their academic endeavors. In the face of these terrible odds and statistics, it is only normal that the student feels crushed by a society which has all but completely abandoned him. A society in which being a philosopher, a writer, or an artist is a form of slow suicide. A society in which you are told that you do not require a degree to get employment, yet without it you are shoved aside. This always felt as a paradox, how sometimes people with degrees value less in the eyes of some employers than those who have completed online courses. But in the end, capitalism only values results and not the way in which they were achieved. Capitalism found a friend in cynicism, and the end seems to always justify the means as long as the end is profit. The system by which the college is funded means that it literally cannot afford to exclude students, even if it wanted to. Resources are allocated to colleges on the basis of how successfully they meet targets on achievement, attendance and retention of students. Capitalism downplays the mental health situation. Back in the fourth industrial era, a worker could have a simple life by achieving mastery in a certain field. Nowadays, we are sold the Kafkaesque horror situation of indefinite postponement. We are sold the monstrous idea that education is a lifelong process, training that persists for as long as your working life continues. Work you take home with you, working from home, homing from work. We've been surprised to see what are the must-haves for an internship nowadays. It is at best funny, at worst distressing, to see how companies expect knowledge way above the average level for one of the worst paid positions in a company. And what's more terrifying is that there are actually people who wasted their personal time to actually satisfy these comical demands that should have been shoved away at a first glance from a reasonable individual. Only the thought that a company would, on purpose, demand more from someone that came to their door to learn and deliberately hiring people that already have that knowledge just to slave them on minimum wage is a situation we expected to see in a movie about idiots, is nonsensical and arbitrarily evil. The idea that someone sells you the promise of knowledge and then on purpose seeks and accepts only people that already have that knowledge, so he wouldn't waste time on training that was promised, this idea seems like a nightmare, a machination of a sick mind. It is only normal given these aberrant conditions of work with little to no social security that mental health has declined. Depressive disorders are extremely common. Our World in Data.com in a study in 2019 says that the 5 most common mental illnesses are depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, and eating disorders. It is interesting that the rates of these 5 illnesses have been almost constant since 1990, with a particular rise between 1992 and 2006. Capitalism has spread the idea that a mental disease is just a chemical imbalancement in our heads, and we think you can already see the pattern. Capitalism creates the problem of mental illness and then sells the solution, pills and so-called treatments. There are a lot more things left undiscussed in the book, but we think we've touched the most important ones. We recommend you go read Capitalist Realism yourselves, because this book is indeed on point. It is more than a critique of our society. It is an extensive list of everything we are doing wrong. It is the work of a truly brilliant mind. This is where we are going to stop now. There are probably going to be some more videos based on a certain topics from this book. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe if you want to see more. Until next time, we wish you a day with as few problems and solutions bought as possible.